We are back on Otherworld for game number 2 in this set between Scoler and neblime. Neblime is, once again, T-green Zerg. Well, he wasn't T-green, but you know what I mean. And, of course, Scoler is the blue Terran. So now Scoler will be showing us his Terran. This is the race that he signed up in Ascension number 5 for. 3, 2, 1, blast off. Ignition. Yep, that's right. Ignition, because we are starting to blast off indeed. Now, neblime will be going for a Quaseth opener. We did see this in one of the matches within the Grand Finals of Ascension, number 4, so we'll have to see whether or not neblime is, maybe like this is the game where he practiced that or something, right? Like I said earlier, this does seem like it was played prior to the finals, just based on the verbiage that neblime sent me. He mentioned that I should take a look at these games, and mostly because he thinks that Scoler comes off well in them. So that first match was maybe a little bit more rocky. We'll see how the rest of them go. Stockade coming out for Scoler. And of course, I have to go ahead and set up my camera hockeys, don't I? Let's go ahead and do that. Yes, we did discuss this a little bit earlier in the previous set, so I'll go ahead and do that. The first scout is on the way here for neblime. It will be heading straight towards Scoler's base. I'm still looking for some kind of anything. I thought it was going to be Quaseth because there was no gas, but now he has enough for a Hatterask, and he's nearly got enough for a Hydreth. So I guess that's what it's going to be, a late Hydreth. And he'll probably put the bank minerals into some kind of fast play for an expansion. It's pretty much the only thing I can think of. It looks like it might be even a macro hatch, judging by his Droleth positioning. This game feels a little weird. This feels like maybe neblime was indecisive, not really sure what he was up against or what he wanted to do. But we do have a couple of Mavericks out here. Second Stockade finished. So it's going to be infantry heavy for the XD man himself, and that Hatterask is only now starting. So it'll be a while before that finishes, but while we wait for the action to get underway, I can just remind you that we do indeed have crowdfunding available for tournament prize pools or just general project development, and you can send either or to the link you see in the bottom right hand corner. Do appreciate that stuff. A couple Hydras on the way. Is that a third? Yes, it is. Okay, so it's going to be Hydra play into Bio. Not normally an answer that you would expect. Obviously, he can pivot to Iziricors if he ends up getting a little bit more mineral income. Already behind in workers, you can see, just sort of how the matchup goes. But his second Hatterask is going to help to alleviate some of those issues. And we do see that behind this, he is going to add a Skittercore. That's mostly going to be for handling some scouting. Now, 3 Hydras alone, they do not beat a really heavy bio push, but only 5 Mavericks here. They are on an attack move vector, so that's kind of interesting. And we're obviously going to see the first couple of shots here, advantage towards the Hydras. The stim pack is used to push them forward, and if he ends up focus firing any of these Hydras, he would be able to kill them, but instead bruises the Skith a little bit, and one of the Hydras does go down to almost, we would say a quarter of its life. What's the response back at home for Scoler? He's adding a Fulcrum, some Cyprians. So he's actually spending a decent amount of gas on this offensive, considering he's already got 200 gas down the drain in terms of expenditure. And again, this is actually fine for if you're going to have 3 workers generally harvesting the gas. This is acceptable. But your next worker should definitely be onto that geyser, right? I guess technically you could add one more into the ridge, but especially with that vest replacement there, I'm thinking the next worker should definitely go on the geyser. So this Skittercore is still sort of like moving around. He's actually adding double vestry, so that's really interesting. That's going to be a fairly expensive amount of gas used just to establish the ability to do that. And it looks like the Hatterask is not going to be used to spread Kagro down towards that ramp. Instead, it will be used explicitly for the in-base, and that's fine. I like to call them micro bases or in-bases or whatever. It's pretty meh. You can kind of use whichever term you like. Obviously, this space is ideal for a treasury for Terran. And indeed, we do have a couple Cyclops coming out. Now, these units did receive a graphical update since then. I'm pretty sure this is also being played before. Oh, no, this actually... Oh, hey, we even see the Kagran drop using the Avaleth. I was about to reference that earlier, too. But yeah, we will be seeing a couple of interesting moves coming down here for neblime. And yeah, visually speaking, if we end up seeing Goliaths, we will see the new version of that as well. Scoler is going to go ahead and build his next ministry on site, so that'll be his expansion. It's going to be a little bit behind neblime's, but neblime's also has a limited amount of mineral gain, right? So you kind of have to make of that what you will, and see what happens there. Starting to saturate his ridge by the looks of things. Could obviously saturate this geyser, and looks like that's what he's going to do next. A lot of workers being made. You can see here, neblime is very scant on the when it comes to the infantry. So this push, you know, there's a decent amount of bio here. There's a couple Cyclops. This could be quite deadly. It could, at the very least, thin the herd of, you know, the Hydras, and then maybe kill some workers while the next round of military units is being made. It's still, suddenly now he's going to go ahead and try to pivot, but it looks like maybe Scoler is a little bit cautious of moving up that ramp. It feels like that was his time, right? There was one Circuit, there's 4 Hydras. I don't know if he knows that in CMBW you don't have mischance. This force could absolutely bust this open, particularly with the Clerics helping to sustain things like the Cyprians in the back line. But it's just not going to happen. And back at home, he's obviously dealing with, you know, adding even more units. Skittercore is going to harass this Mason, and there's nothing over there to protect it. So luckily, he does already have another Mason heading over there, so it will be interrupted, but not for very long. But that is still just going to be a little bit annoying. He could add a Watchdog, obviously, to deal with the Skittercore and prevent it from getting too many further kills. Looks like it already had one earlier. So, is going to have to fall back from that. Stim pack used for free because, of course, the nearby Cleric. Yeah, I think he's gonna think twice about that. He's gonna think better of that. So yeah, back at home, you know, neblime is banking a lot of gas, has a lot of workers. This is the kind of thing you don't want to deal with when you're playing against neblime, is if he can safely get up to his sort of macro shenanigans. I think a player more familiar with the game state and with the way that certain behaviors work and stuff definitely would have been able to do a little bit better there in that situation. Now, we do see a pretty big force being moved out over here. I think this is more or less all of the military that is had by Scoler. He's adding anchors at the front, but there's nothing in them, so they're almost like just for show, while he trains a couple of additional units, adds a scrapyard, presumably for blackjacks. And back over here, there's probably going to be a Spraith, if I had to guess, based on that placement. If that attack hits and that Spraith is already being mutated, okay, the eye roll is out, but this army definitely handily defeats what Scoler has. So he's only now going to make the Kagrant, which is just fine. The Cyclops obviously move a little bit faster than the rest of the military. And it looks like, yeah, Scoler is going to go ahead and start maneuvering. When you the magic boxing thing, obviously with so many units selected, can be a little bit annoying to deal with. So this is actually going to be canceled and turned into a Spraith, interestingly enough. And I think that's probably it's a little puzzling as a decision. Now he's going to remake it into a Kagrant because his initial force got picked apart. He only has 7 military units. One of those is an Ovaleth, guys. So really, he's got 6 attackers. He's going to have to evacuate the worker line. And this is a pretty big W for Mr. Scoler. Obviously, could be focusing down this circuit a little bit better. His clerics are doing their best to heal some of these units. And mostly, it seems like Mavericks have been the main units to fall so far. Finally, a Cyclops does go down. And yeah, I think this Hatrosk is definitely going to be... The Hatrosk should fall here, right? The more defensive posture away from the cliff advantage to ramp. Some of these eggs are taking splash from the Cyprians. And actually, the Cyprians are going to be doing a little bit less damage on piercing on this particular version, but we are definitely seeing a lot of these exchanges slowly but surely go Neblime's way. However, I mean, I say that, some of these units can still be quite lethal. It looks like he's going to lose even more Hydras, be forced to make even more units, right? Where he really would like, ideally, be making more workers at this point and expanding, or maybe using his tech, which did finish in the backdrop of all this. So yeah, the rest of these forces are definitely going to be falling. This, I think it blocks access to both of these minerals. So that could be a huge issue because he double mutated it. So it's going to take a while to be burst down. And back at home, obviously, there's opportunity for Scoler to tech up, but instead he's just going to be adding more and more military units. Didn't really use his Fulcrum during all of that, it looks like. Unless he maybe has... Yeah, he didn't garrison these anchors yet with anything. So his Fulcrum was idle that whole time. And yeah, you can see 2 mineral fields of the 9 over here. I mean, that's a pretty steep loss. So I hope Neblime realizes that and pops that. But even then, it's definitely going to be a little bit on the slower side. Only now is he getting his back tith, so honestly, looking pretty solid here for Scoler. He seems to have been able to, you know, use the other world, right? The other side of the world, left-hand side, other side of the map, to go all the way around. And it wasn't scouted, it wasn't anticipated. More military posturing. Maybe he can do some sort of pincer move. Obviously, his Mason trying to take a third was harassed and stopped. The circuits over here are not being mutated into higher tier units, so that could be a downfall of sorts for, depending on what happens with Neblime's attack force, right? Adding another macro hatch almost is like a safety, like, well, at least I'll have like some efficiency on these resources instead of distance mining, if that does pop. since it is so low, and a Mutath coming up as well. I didn't comment on the Quasath earlier, but that's definitely something that is a thing. And the Atlas is only now showing up here for Scoler. But he's expanding behind this. You'll notice he hasn't built any static defense in his main. He has one Watchdog and a bunch of anchors that are completely empty. So it's kind of interesting there. He's playing a very dangerous game in that respect. There was a Zethar Core that was sent out here just to scout. This one's kind of in a weird spot, but, you know, probably just sort of like right-clicked in a few different spots. So you see, yeah, the same sort of thing happening over here. So yeah, that scouts the move out, and some backdolls are out. But even despite that, I don't really rate this army too much, you know? Like, there's a lot of bio here. Obviously, if he holds on the ramp, he can definitely do a lot. It really depends on how this angle of attack is taken, but the backdolls should be back here, right? They should be taking, you know, cliff advantage and really shelling them from a distance. But stims are coming in. Obviously, the backdolls are going to bounce, and only one of them was attacking for a while there. They can fall back to the Scorchwrath, which has been kept alive. And what is the play here? A couple backdolls are, you know, taking damage, but oh, there comes the big splashes there, and the Cyprians are being body blocked by the Hatcherosks, right? So that's a pretty big loss there. And yeah, unfortunately, doesn't really get a whole lot. Stops some mining, kills some Zeths, but that's pretty much it. I don't think he got a single Bactylus kill. But he does have the Atlas completed, so he's adding up Palladium. It looks like he's starting to transfer some workers over here. At the very least, he's adding some Sentinels for anti-ground. That'll defend against something like, you know, some Zethar Core run-bys. Although if there's only one Sentinel there, that could be a pretty big issue as well. Palladium is complete. He's going to start adding some Phalanxes. We'd love to see those. And he doesn't realize that you can just self-destruct this, it looks like. So that's another thing. If you look at the command card when you select an add-on, there's a button on the bottom left that lets you detonate it safely. If you double-tap it, it detonates explosively and will deal some damage in an area. So, you know, you can use that as like an emergency versus certain moves you could think of that could definitely use that. Meanwhile, more Sentinels. So any air unit over here could still be somewhat... you could imagine it's conceivable that they could do some damage. And I like some Hurricanes here. That's not a bad shout either, right? Because you look at the Hurricanes, you think to yourself, like, at the very least, they can take less damage from the Bactylus due to their armor. They can obviously, you know, benefit pretty heavily from rending the armor of the enemy. Bactylusks do have a pretty healthy amount of armor. There's also some Protathalors. That's going to be good for single target versus things like the Phalanx. But not 100% sure if it'll be... Like, will they be in enough number to really heavily deal with this? And we don't see any airplay here. You know, we have this safety spraits because why not? But we see no airplay. Instead, it's going to be a captaincies out for some madcaps. Speaking of caps, we don't see any capped geysers here for Scoler. Actually, I'm not sure that we see that for... Yeah, there's actually nothing happening over here either. But obviously there is... Neblime is on up a base. Well, I suppose he's kind of like up... Well, I don't know. In terms of workers, he's definitely up. But yeah, I guess at the same time, you know, Neblime only now taking another expansion. His mutas are going to be scouting around. He's looking for a move out. Maybe he can do some damage, go on the offensive. And only a couple of Phalanxes here, right? This looks like 4 by my count. He is adding another couple. More Stockades coming. Not really using all of his production just yet. And he does have some Apostles on the way. So that could obviously turn the fight in a more prolonged engagement if they can stay alive. And again, almost zero scouting happening for Scoler. He can absolutely be taken aback or by surprise, depending on what kind of moves end up happening over here. He is going to start to maybe see if he can push out towards this high ground. Or at least he's posturing like he's going to. But that's not where Neblime's forces are. So they could pass like, you know, potentially like ships in the night. A whole bunch of workers being sent over here because there is a ridiculous number of workers in general for Neblime. So he doesn't mind doing a little bit of distance mining here while he sets up his... what will be his 4th base. His 5th base is actually still chugging away over there. And yeah, look at this. Kind of posturing over here is going to spot some of these units. A lot of eggs being mutated over here, but it looks like they're all Vorvs. So not really too significant there. They try to surround the Cleric. They're going to fall back. Some units on the left-hand side, adding to the skirmish. It looks like maybe there's a little bit of a kerfluffle here. Some sieges. A Bactylusk and the Anchor, of course, get even more range, why don't you? Obviously, Phalanxes in siege mode can outrange that. And there are some Matroleths out, too, so that you got to be a little bit wary of that. Engagement looks like it's going to be coming in pretty soon. There is, again, the Apostles are here, but they haven't started to revive anything just yet. Hasn't selected them. Oh, there we go. We're starting to see that. This Apostle's the big daddy here, it looks like, because there's... The other one, yeah, okay, he finally does fall. So that's going to cut that a little bit short. There's a lot of corpses here. potentially to be used. The Teflors are starting to engage onto the Phalanxes, and it's just an overwhelming force here. Not really a whole lot of anti-air to deal with the Matrolets to begin with. And a lot of them were engaged with everything else. So again, this is like the quintessential, I'm letting my opponent get up to a lot of bases and macro up, and all of the energy, all the larvae, all the resources that went into those workers wound up instead going into military units that just utterly overwhelm my ability to produce. And it kind of looks like there was almost no hope there, but again, Scoler at least went on the offensive more decisively than in the previous game when he played as Protoss. And I feel like even though this game lasted about as long as the previous one did and ended in kind of a similar way, this felt a lot more like Scoler was in the game, right? So we'll have to see if he can adapt throughout the rest of the series, as obviously this one did indeed go Neblime's way. He's now, 2-0 in the set. Again, there were 6 games that were sent to me, so we'll see. I don't imagine it's a 6-0 sweep, but it could be a 6-0 sweep, so we'll have to see. But yeah, there's definitely, it feels like, oh man, there's just so much stuff there that you have to be a little bit cautious of, perhaps. And, are we going to be watching Scoler sort of like build this familiarity with Neblime's playstyle and realize my opponent is just sort of like turtling up? I can, try to scout that a little bit more. Maybe he'll discover airplay for that particular purpose, or, some other way of scouting. It's definitely a possibility, right? And yeah, I guess that's probably the main thing that I would say is, Neblime takes this. He's now up 2-0, like I mentioned. I'm just going to go ahead and update the overlay real quick. But generally speaking, Scoler seems like he's got the right idea of actually attacking and taking the initiative, even so much so that it almost feels like you could exploit that by attacking him or distracting him or something while he doesn't have that much static defense. Like, a lot of players in CMBW start off being a little bit too safe and building too much static defense. And Scoler's actually skimping on that, so that kind of feels like something you could use against him. But at the same time, at the very least, by attacking, he's doing something on the map, right? He's giving himself a better shot at potentially winning in that sense. So, yeah, I feel like that's already pretty good. So that's a good sign for Scoler. And I'd like him to continue that, tempered a little bit by an understanding of like what your opponent's tendencies are and also the tech trees, like what their capabilities are and such. But generally speaking, he's discovering tier 2. It was a little slow this game, but still something that's worth pointing out. And he was able to add Palladiums for the Phalanxes. He was able to add captaincies for Madcaps and Apostles. Had he positioned his army a little bit better, he might have done a little bit better in that fight. But it also felt like when the Matrolets were able to come out and all that resources being put into the specialists, you could have put those that amount of resources into pretty much anything, and Neblime still would have been able to win handily. He just had more money, you can see here on the scoreboard. So that is the fate of Scoler in the second match. Obviously, join us for the third match, which is also going to be on Otherworld, and then we'll swap over to Nightfall, where we have a change in scenery and maybe a change in outcome too. You never know. Stay tuned.